Okay, this one might be a bit of a thinker, but walk with me. We're going to make it work. Hi, welcome. Come on in. My name is Aoife, and today I'm taking you through another Books and Brews video. I've got a cup of coffee here with me. I've got 3 books beside me that all have something in common, and I'm going to tell you my thoughts on all 3 of them. Today's topic is Irish authors and. So everyone who's featured in this video is going to be Irish, is going to have written a book, but being an author is not their main source of income. They're either a broadcaster or a presenter or a journalist of some other form, but the main source of their money is not through their authorship. Let's take a look at who these people are, and let's take a look at the books that they've written. First one up is Oh My God, What a Complete Aisling by Sarah Breen and Emer McLysaght. Sarah and Emer are 2 journalists. One is from Kildare and one is from Carlow, but both are living in Dublin at the moment. They also both met when they were studying in Dublin about 10 or 12 years ago by now. They were living in a very small bedsit house in Dublin and came up with the idea of Aisling. Aisling is your very typical Irish country girl. She lives for brown mascara. She is living and working in Dublin, but always goes back home to her parents every single weekend to have a great dinner, catch up with her family, and just basically have Mammy's creature comforts for the weekend. They started making jokes about what Aisling would be like as a person, what she's like in the workforce. For example, Aisling will wear her runners when she's going to work, but will trade them out for her really expensive and smart shoes for the office wear. She will bring her lunch with her in a Brown Thomas bag or in a John Lewis bag or some kind of fancy department store grocery bag. They made these jokes among themselves and their friends, and then they set up these Facebook groups so that they could share these jokes together and these little quips. And then it kind of went viral. And at the moment, there are 50,000 people in the group, and they are completely closed to any new joiners. A couple of years back, Guild Books approached the 2 women and asked them if they would like to bring Aisling's story to the books. And they loved the idea of it, but they didn't want to go for like the coffee table book of quips and quotes that I think Guild was more looking for. They wanted to give Aisling the novel and the story that they feel like she deserved. This is the first book of the series. There are 4 at the moment, and the 4th one just came out last October. So if you do pick this one up and you enjoy it, don't worry, there are plenty more that you can take a look at. In this first book, you are following Aisling, the titular Aisling, and she and her boyfriend John have been together since they were about 15 and 16 years old. Aisling is now approaching 28. She's starting to look for a ring on her finger, but John does not seem to be in any kind of hurry to propose. They're on a holiday in Tenerife, and every occasion Aisling is thinking that he's going to bring a ring out, and he doesn't. She comes home with an empty left finger. Aisling then decides that she's had enough waiting around, and she's not going to sit around and wait for John. She's going to go out and seek her own fortunes elsewhere. So she leaves her tiny town of Ballygobbard and sets her sights for Dublin, where she's going to work in a pensions office. Basically, you are following Aisling on her story of kind of self-discovery and reinvention, and I absolutely loved it. Like Aisling, I also come from a very small community. I come from a very tight-knit community, and I went to college in Dublin, lived in Dublin for 5 years before I came over here to Germany. Anytime I go back to the Aisling books, it takes me back to that time where you didn't have any responsibilities, you didn't have any worries, you were just living for the moment. While there are quite a lot of light-hearted moments in this book, I will say that there are also quite deeper themes that are discussed here. Illnesses, bereavement, grief, all that kind of thing also plays into Aisling's life in some way or another. And I really think that this was dealt with wonderfully, especially when you realise that this is something that one of the authors had also gone through in her own personal life. I feel like that kind of connection with it really did add a depth to Aisling's story, and it is such a wonderful thing that I don't think I have seen discussed on book pages at all before this. I will say one thing about the books though. They are incredibly Irish. You do kind of need to have some ideas of Irish culture, Irish traditions, Irish themes, Irish pop culture if you're going to go into these books. I was trying to explain the books to a friend of mine from the UK recently, and ideas such as the Rose of Tralee, such as the immersion, such as playing in centre back on a GAA team. These were ideas that were very alien to her, but for other people in Ireland who've picked up the Aisling books, they will just roll off the tongue. Just as a kind of a glossary, the Rose of Tralee is a pageant that takes place every year in Tralee in County Kerry, where women who are of Irish origin come back and celebrate their Irish ancestry and perform songs, dances, poems, etc. And then one of them is crowned the Rose of Tralee for the coming year. The immersion is very difficult to explain. In most Irish homes, there is a separate water tank in one of the rooms that we call the hot press. You might know it as your airing cupboard. To have hot water for showers, for baths, to have sink water so that you can do the washing up. Sometimes you will need to put the immersion on so that this hot water tank will heat up a little bit and will give you a little bit of hot water, but it can be quite expensive to run. So you will often hear of Irish people saying that they forgot to turn off the immersion and now they're expecting a sky high bill this year. Centre back is one of the positions on a GAA team. It's in the defending line and it's not completely in front of the goal, but it is one step ahead of them. If you can get past all of the Irishness, if you know somebody who can be like a walking Irish translator for you, these books are phenomenal to read. They are full of heart. Aisling herself is such a wonderful character. All of her friends are such wonderfully developed people, especially because they've been in the works for 10 years. So Sarah and Emer have had plenty of time to think back about what they want these characters to be like, how they want them to be represented on the screen, on the pages. And there is definitely somebody in every single Aisling book that you readers are going to realize that this is me in a book. As I said, there are already 4 books published in the Aisling series. So there is Oh My God, What a Complete Aisling, but there is also The Importance of Being Aisling, Once, Twice, 3 Times in Aisling, and Aisling in the City, which just came out in October and features Aisling living a new life for herself in New York. If you like the sound of those, I implore you to go and pick up the Aisling series. Next up is Homestretch by Graham Norton, and I am sure Graham Norton is a name that is familiar to you, not as an author, but as a chat show host. Graham Norton's chat show is one that I have seen celebrities say time and time again. It's their favourite one to appear on because of its relaxed atmosphere, because you get a drink when you come out onto the show, and also you get to just have some fun with Graham and the other people on the couch. Even as a viewer, you can see the kind of joy that radiates from everybody who is on the couch, but we're here to talk about the books. This book starts in 1987 in a small town in Cork, where there is a car accident the day before a wedding in the community. 6 people are in the car and 3 of them survive. One of the survivors is Connor, who is the driver of the car. Connor cannot really deal with the reactions that people have in the community to this accident and decides that he is going to head for Liverpool. Connor is a gay man and he's not so much welcomed into the community in Liverpool, so he decides then to head for London and then subsequently to New York to make a new life for himself, make a new name for himself, and to basically try and separate the past from the man that he is now. There are, of course, flashbacks to what happened in the accident. You learn a lot more about Connor's interactions with the people in the car, a lot more about Connor's involvement in the accident, that things aren't always as they had seemed to be with everything that had happened on that night. And you learn a lot more about Connor as a person as well. Throughout the book as well, you also focus on some of the other survivors of the accident, but also the members of Connor's family that he has pretty much left behind as he has gone for a new life. So you've got his mother and his father, but also his sister Ellen, who has gotten married to one of the other occupants of the car who survived the crash, Martin. Things aren't always as rosy in Martin and Ellen's marriage as they appear. Throughout the book, you also get to know Ellen and Martin's children, and one of them has got an impact on Connor's story later on in the book. This is the 3rd book of Graham that I have read, but it is the 2nd one of them that absolutely gripped me. I also read A Keeper by him, and I've also read Holding, and A Keeper was the one that I really enjoyed, while Holding, I liked it but I didn't love it so much. Graham has got this fantastic way of telling stories that you think you've got everything figured out, you think you know exactly where the book is going and what roads you're going down, and then something happens that completely sets everything on a 180 and you have no idea where you're standing with these characters anymore. There are quite a lot of depictions of homophobia in this book, especially in the chapters that are set in the late 1980s to early 1990s in Ireland. This would be quite common in Ireland. It wasn't the country that we know and love at the moment. It wasn't as tolerant, it wasn't as open, and it wasn't as accepting. So seeing people live other lifestyles wouldn't have been as well accepted as it would be these days. It's difficult to read, but it's done incredibly accurately. I will say that I felt like there were quite a lot of characters in this novel that you have to contend with. There's a lot of, in the first chapter, you're meeting all 6 characters who were in the car accident, and you're also discovering which ones of them survived and which ones didn't. And I will say that that prologue was done really well in that you're discovering the backstories of these people who were in the car, why they're in the car in the first place, what they're intending to do with the rest of their lives, whether or not their lives were cut short that evening. Even aside from that, it felt like there were a lot of people to get to know, a lot of stories to have to kind of get to know the stories as well as the characters. And for me, it was a little bit too much. I felt like I needed a bit of a Venn diagram to see who is this person, what is this person doing, why do I need to know who this person was and where they were. It did kind of alleviate towards the end of the book where you're not talking about as many characters you had been in the previous chapters, but there might have been a little bit too many for me. At times, this book feels a little bit semi-autobiographical at least. Graham Norton obviously did grow up in Ireland in roughly the same time as this book would have been set, as a gay man in a small town in Ireland that would have had quite closed values. So there can be the argument made that there might be moments from his childhood or from his formative years that have shaped how this book was written. But I think that that has truly added to the magic of this book. It is a wonderful story. It is phenomenally told. And I am really excited for Graham's next book, which is coming out in September of this year. The final book that I'm going to talk about is The Letter Home by Rachael English. Rachael is a broadcaster working for RTE, which is the Irish state broadcaster, and she works on Morning Ireland, which is Ireland's morning current affairs news programme that broadcasts on RTE Radio 1 every weekday morning. This is Rachael's 6th novel, and it follows 3 women who all have some kind of interconnection that you have to figure out what the connection is. In the present day, you are following 2 women. Jessie, who is working as a journalist but has had a bit of a controversy in her job and escapes back to her parents in Clooneven in County Clare to kind of recuperate and get back on her feet. While she's here, she reconnects with a childhood friend of hers, Ger, who is working as a primary school teacher in the local school, and they are doing a project on the famine. The famine hit Ireland between 1845 and 1849, and the population of Ireland significantly declined in those moments. Over 1 million people died, and over a further 1 million people emigrated either to Canada, the US, or the UK. Jessie decides that she is going to help out with some research for this project, and she comes across the story of Bridget Maloney, who lived in the area at the time of the famine. Then you go over to the US, and also in the current day, you're following Caitlin Wilson, who is looking into her own family history and discovering things that she didn't know about her own family, and is trying to convince her brother that his new job in immigration reform is not a great idea because he came from immigrant stock himself. I like how this book was laid out. There are 3 different timelines that you're following, 2 at the present moment and 1 set back in the time of the famine. And there was never any confusion as to who is the dominant voice here, whose story am I listening to, because it was always laid out at the start of the chapters if there's going to be a shift in the narrative. I will say that of the stories here, I much preferred following Bridget's story. I loved catching up with her after every couple of chapters that we'd been with the other 2 women. I love reading books that are set in the famine anyway, so going back and reading this was phenomenal. I think overall I would actually just read a book of Bridget's story anyway because she was such a captivating person, and it's set in a time that genuinely interests me as a person, so I would really love to read her story. There are a couple of things in this book that are set on real life things but are fictionalized, such as the boat that Bridget takes to go over to the US. That is a kind of a fictionalized account of one of these boats that would have left Ireland at the time. I had her tell as well that the story of Bridget was kind of brought to life in Rachael's mind by seeing a very famous picture of a woman starving in the famine with her 2 children standing around her, that there was a kind of something that sparked in her mind and she was like, I want to make a story of this woman's life. I feel like she did that justice, and the chapters that are set in the time of the famine are engaging and they're so insightful and also a little bit informative and educational as well. It might make you even want to go and pick up a book about the famine. But I will say that the character that I like reading the least was Jessie. I didn't really connect with her at all, despite having similar qualifications to her. I felt like she wasn't the kind of person I would like to get along with. I may have misread it, but I don't particularly understand the reason that Jessie had such a controversy at her work. I feel like I might need to go back and read through that chapter again a couple of times to understand it. Maybe it wasn't clear for me, or maybe it just wasn't written clearly. In Caitlin's story, there is a storyline that came maybe about 60% towards the end of the book, and I felt like it was a little bit out of place. It didn't feel like it had any necessity to be in a story like this, and I think it was just done to kind of show why Brian's job was such a bad road to go down. and I think it took me out of the book a little bit. Like in Homestretch, again, there are quite a lot of chapters here, especially in Caitlin's chapters, as she has quite a big family and a pretty big extended family as well. And you get a lot of mentions about her cousins and her aunts and her uncles and why they're important in her story as well. And I do feel like I just needed to go back a couple of times and say, okay, this is Caitlin's aunt, this is Caitlin's cousin, this is her sister, this is her brother. And I feel like it was just a couple people too many for me to keep track of. Overall, I did enjoy this story. Maybe not as much as I was expecting or hoping to, but I did have a good time while I was reading it, and I will definitely go and pick up something else from Rachael in the future. Those are 3 books written by Irish authors who also have other day jobs. Are there any other authors that you know of who also have other exploits? I would absolutely love to go and check those out too. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.